Aliens. They're out there. Or are they among us already? Doo 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 doo.
With that ominous introduction, welcome to this month's episode of the 800s. I am your host, Alex, and you just heard from my spooky sci-fi alien, maybe not co-host, Adam. And as always, thank you to Alan for making our streams happen. As always, couldn't do it without you, buddy.
Yeah, thanks, Alan.
With that, let's dive into plugs so that we can start discussing this
Yeah.
book.
If you heard some music before our lovely faces appeared before you, as if by spaceship, um, that was Fearless First by Incompetech. You should check out everything they have to offer at incompetech.filmmusic.io. Otherwise, you should head over to dmstable.com to check out who we are and what we're about. But enough of the boring details. Let's jump into the thing that we're here for.
All right, so this month on the 800s, we'll be discussing that classic sci-fi novel, The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, a book that was written all the way back in the 19th century. Humans
Oof.
had, until that fated day, felt themselves the highest observers of life on this planet, except perhaps God himself, or so muses the author. Yet, when lightning strikes all across England, mankind is faced with a visitor from another planet, beings that treat humans as they would ants or cattle, and humanity will not let this stand. Let the War of the Worlds commence.
Let me give you a quick rundown. If this is your first time joining us tonight, we are a discussion show. What that means is we are looking for questions or topics about the War of the Worlds to discuss. Alex and myself will peruse chat or come up with a topic ourselves to discuss. We will pitch it out there for all of y'all watching. And while you guys are clickety clacketing away with your responses, we'll discuss our viewpoints and then we'll head over to chat and see what you guys have to say. At any time, feel free to throw up a topic or question of your choosing in chat, and we'll be sure to bring it up at the next lull in the conversation. That's pretty much it.
Also, a quick little disclaimer that we do cover adult themes and topics, so bring kids around at your own discretion. We try not to swear too much, but it fucking happens sometimes. Also, we're trying to build a fun and supportive community over at DM Stable where everyone can feel free to share and indulge in all of the things that they're passionate about without any fear of judgment or negativity. So, in sum, be nice or fuck off. Trying to recreate the sound that the tripods make.
Yeah. Yeah, that was like the movie little
Yeah,
blur that they do.
that's the best approximation I had, and I wasn't sure what to go with, but I think it sounded enough. With that, why
Yeah.
don't we get the actual discussion started with our usual first topic of voiced impressions?
Yeah. My first impressions of this book were kind of like what's going on, because it felt very like disjointed when we snapped to the guy's perspective, the narrator's perspective, and it was just like third person to first person in one go, and I was like, holy cow, who is this? What's going on? Um but I will give H.G. Wells credit where due. He does a fantastic job of impersonating somebody who is writing a essentially journal, um, that or a memoir, let's say, to the world. and making it sound real despite being about fantastical events.
Uh, yeah, I can see the disorientation uh being there is a very specific perspective taken in this, and it is something that I noticed as well right off the bat, but I came into it with that understanding like that it was intentional just because this was almost immediately adapted into radio, which was a huge deal at the time because radio was still brand new. Um, and the whole point is to shock the reader in like to really put them in it. Like that was the whole point is when the original War of the Worlds came out as a radio show, it scared hundreds of thousands of people because it was meant to be like as real and observational as it would be as if like somebody were standing there. So that is purposeful, and to an extent, I'm not sure how specifically that was planned for radio, but I know that because like there was something of that supposedly in H.G. Wells's mind right from the beginning, which was fun to play with as a perspective taking exercise, which whether you take it as intended like you did or as academically as I did, it kind of is the first thing that grabs you is the specific perspective taken by the author. So I agree there.
Yeah. What did you considering we kind of left off on this note? What did you think do you think sorry, I'm trying to word this without being without smashing my opinion out there. Um, what did you on the topic of the narration style, do you think it played well from a literary perspective? Is that too wordy of a question?
I guess I'm trying to understand exactly what you mean. If you could try and rephrase it, because I think I have
Like,
an
do you
idea, but it feels a little
yeah,
too overlappy with the first impressions.
like, yeah, so the author decided to take the perspective of this is a character in the story writing a book. Do you think he wrote that with the intent of the writing being a different style than what he would have personally written, or do you think the style that it's written in is his
Natural style.
um natural style?
Well, I've read a bit of H.G. Wells, and it kind of is the natural style. There, it's also somewhat indicative of the style of writing at the time in general. When you read a lot of these books that are turn of the 19th into the 20th century, there are certain things that I think we take for granted in sci-fi and fantasy where we can just say, look, there's the goblin, or look, there's the alien, and then we can kind of vaguely fill in some gaps with the help of the author describing the thing. Whereas, because, and part of that has to do with the fact that we've had TV and the internet, like any number of things where we have the images in our head to, kind of place us there in a way that back then you just didn't. The book had to do all the work, and you had to you also have to take into account the fact that this is, you know, still in the throes of, like this is pre World War One industrialization still going on, and there's reading is a relatively new thing for the masses, and it
Yeah.
is it was not to get too deep into the historical context, but you did have to kind of have a character in there that was inherently observant of the world, or you basically just had to go full exposition. And I think it
Yeah.
feels a little more natural to have a character within the world having these thoughts so that the person reading it can be like, oh, I would have had that question too. And it follows very logical steps of like, well, I saw this, so I looked here because I needed to know if this and that connected to each other in some certain way, whether it's talking about the corkscrew on the ship or the way that the arms moved on them, or the mist, how the mist was distributed, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think it is purposeful to an extent. It's not the only way that he writes, but it makes sense that that was the way that it was written for the time. So it's hard to tell for sure if it was one or the other.
Yeah. The thing that stands out to me in the chosen style is there are a couple of times where the narrator goes to describe something and says, it defies description. You had to see it. I can't explain it to you.
Mhm.
You had to be there. I can't possibly put it into words. Things along those lines. And it got me thinking, like, is that a literal literary choice where he's like, my character would not have the prose to explain what he is seeing. He would say, you had to be there. Or is Wells saying, I don't know how to explain this. It's something so unbelievable. You had to be there. You know what I mean?
I would have to say that, like, for the time, this feels very prosaic, and I think that is part of it. Is just like if this were the average man, how do you explain the inexplicable? You don't. So you like it is both that like a prosaic choice, but it also feels like, hey, why not let the reader let their imagination go wild a little bit here? You know,
Yeah.
it's kind of like a literary version of pause for laughs, but pause for awe.
Yeah, I kind of took it as a choice by Wells to be like, this is how his character would describe it. And I think it works well. It gets you into that. It makes you feel like you're that character.
Mhm. V.S. Drake says that the writing style was very interesting to them and it was well thought out and heady at the same time, but also kind of spoon fed the reader. I tend to agree with that. I think it just had to be because, again, there there's not the precedent for filling in the gaps to the level that we can today. Uh, and those it is interesting to see how all the logic comes from these scientific assumptions of the day as well.
Yeah.
Like you would think that it would have evolved this way, but clearly not.
So, given that this book is from math years ago, sorry, I'm tired.
No.
um,
It's
how do
no
you
hunger.
think? How do you think what um, Wells depicted as a superior alien race lived up to what we depict as a superior alien race in today's society?
I think it is surprising how well certain parts of it have held up. The most obvious bit where it didn't is that the aliens are Martians. And it's the assumption that like if there's going to be aliens, they're on Mars. I mean, that is the most obvious thing that didn't hold over time, at least to the extent that, as far as we know, there's no advanced civilization on Mars, even if there are technically Martian microbes. Uh, and uh, it, but when it comes to the idea that they the aliens would come and they would come in machines that would not necessarily mimic what we have on Earth. Like there was that whole bit about uh there wasn't a wheel to be found on the entire mechanism, which, you know, the closest thing they have is that screw top to it.
Yeah.
Uh and it's it took, you know, at the time, if you think about it, like it had to take a pretty significant amount of imagination to imagine something that was scientific but could move without something that was at the time essential to pretty much every complex machine out there, especially the most um, prominent and advanced ones in humanity, being
Yeah.
things like cars and trains and stuff. And even now, I mean, we've seen how well it at least somewhat adapts to, because of the movie. So there are elements of it that absolutely do, and it was, I think, really smart to bring in germ theory, which was is at the time was relatively new. I mean, like there's at least in the course of humanity. So, and it's the current prevailing theory, despite what some people might think, um, is that is you know, so there's elements like that that hold up really well where, you know, at the time this would have been very new stuff and it still fits. So I think it's interesting. It was also interesting to see it not in like it is that like every author takes their little corner of the earth and that is the most important point whenever an alien strike happens, because the whole part of the book being like, well, they should be in France, they're fine because they're not in England. Yet it's war of the whole world. That that little part was interesting to see that like we do the same thing in modern media. And I was just like, oh, that's something that held up well, but not in the way that you'd expect for sci-fi. Um, anyways, what did you find?
So I find that like a lot of modern alien depictions are like aliens are super superior and they're way better at humans at everything and every aspect. And then you also have that theory of like humans are fucking badass. Like we eat poison for fun and our idea of a good night out is beating the hell out of each other. Stuff like that. It's like super savage shit. And like, um, I really like the idea that aliens could be make a colossal mistake. Like they go to another planet and they're like, yeah, we're so superior. We don't even have to fucking try. You're all gonna die before us die, like um that's something that is refreshing and I think a little more realistic in terms of alien expectations. Because like realistically, what about us is going to change between now and when we achieve space travel? Like, are we really going to be that different as a species? And do you see us as a modern depiction of aliens? Or are we more like the Martians of the War of the Worlds, where we could be fooled by some simple mistake?
Well, I think you bring up an interesting point that it is kind of a cautionary tale for just human exploration in general. Is that no being, however high up they are on their planet's, you know, food chain or hierarchy, whatever, no
Yeah.
amount of like higher observation makes you immune to the realities of the universe, which is that unpredictable shit happens. And if you're not prepared for literally, for as much as possible, it's very easy to overlook these literally tiny things, these things that are, out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah. V.S. Drake
Pardon me.
emphasized the wheels and spheres conversation, which I didn't really touch on, but yeah, I totally agree with what V.S. Drake is saying. Um, it's hard to imagine a race of beings that don't have some sort of use for the wheel or a circular device of some sort. Just because of how easy it is to get energy from rotating something to do work somehow.
I
He
wonder.
also
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No,
I was going to move on, so go ahead.
I was gonna say it wouldn't be out of order to assume that they had just figured out how to make those elements completely internal rather than external, like they would have been. Like it's just the author says that they didn't see any sign of it doesn't mean that there aren't ball bearings underneath those sliding arm slots or something making them move. But
Yeah.
yeah, it does bring up an interesting point that just because something, just taking something entirely out doesn't automatically make somebody else's technology advanced. It could be that they're just that dumb where they're just like, you know, uh, maybe spheres are heretical in whatever alien religion. I don't know. But whatever the case, it is interesting to think about that uh, aspect of evolution is like what stuff would you expect or would be reasonable to assume an advanced civilization would have as a part of their technology and how that would evolve mathematically as well as culturally.
V.S. Drake, LOL, plot twist. These were the idiot teenagers just doing a human raid on the planet. This was their midnight trip to 7-Eleven gone horribly wrong. We were their Slurpees.
Mom said
You
I
got
could
anything
go
you
out
want
for
to
snacks.
talk about?
um, I was curious what your thoughts were on the H.G. Wells' interpretation of the human reaction to aliens and the logic of human survival in that instance. So, like, what were your thoughts on the human reaction in particular to aliens?
Yeah, that in my opinion, the reaction is very telling of when this book was written. I think if this book was written 100 years later, then the human reaction would be way more militant and way more prepared. It felt like, the aliens hit and humans were just like, "Huh, ain't that neat?" I assume that was just because the narrator existed in a very rural area and he was just well removed from London, and that
Hmm.
maybe in London they were more like, "Holy shit, what the fuck is that? Get the guns, get the guns!" Bring out the muskets.
Well, there's absolutely some of that. I mean, he talks about it briefly, I believe, in like his initial thought is to go to London. I know it's to find his wife and stuff, but like uh I believe he says that like he could see like the fires in the distance or whatever in a way that he hadn't seen elsewhere. So, yeah, I think you might be exactly right on that point. um Specifically though, I'm wondering about like in those rural areas there, like if you think about it, most of our land is rural. Cities are a small portion of it, even if they do hold those militant wings. Like, what did you think about like the way in which humans reacted? Do you think that still translates, or minus the militant part, or do you think that has changed as well?
I think so. I think today's society would be a lot more prepared to understand what's going on in other places, and a lot more likely to shelter in place instead of doing the run around trying to find a safe place thing that the narrator wanted to do. Other than that, though, I think the reaction played out well. Like, oh fuck, let's get the fuck out of here, and go find somewhere else to be for a while.
uh yeah, I think to some degree I agree about it, especially being more prepared to like deal with how this was affecting the rest of the world. I in some ways think that people might even be slower to freak out about this than these people were. Uh, the governments obviously would freak out about it instantaneously, but like, there's no way that there wouldn't be people on top of those, ships taking TikToks in the same way that those kids were just throwing rocks at it, you know? Like, I just thought about that. It's like the only thing that's different is they'd be taking pictures and videos of it instead of throwing rocks at it. Like, that's. I did like the aspect though, like the survival aspect that uh comes up in the way that people react to long-term potential suffering. Like there's the guy at the house that the narrator stays with,
Yeah.
and how that mental breakdown can happen so quickly for some people, like not being rational enough to ration or to uh stay quiet when he needed to stay quiet. you know like those lack of survival instincts when panic comes in, I thought was really realistic, which is pretty observant for the time, because or at least it was very honest about how some people would react to this, and it didn't have to be, it's not just the women and children freaking out, the men do too, which
Yeah.
for which for the time I think is a bigger deal than, if it were to happen today, uh arguably. And then you compare that with the army guy, like the ex-military guy that he meets, who's like, we're going to build a society right under their nose, and he's got this whole plan for another civilization, and I thought it was pretty astute to be like, yep, when the dynamics of the world shifts, society either has to shift with it or it's gonna get trampled. Had that disease not shown up, his survival plan was legitimate, and I thought it was kind of I it's hard to believe that these days humanity has the flexibility to do that en masse, but at least in a way that is healthy for humanity and not just turning into a whole bunch of cults. But I thought it was super well handled in creating these very different reactions and showing the depth of those reactions. I wasn't expecting to get that much because, like, I'd seen the movie, I had seen or listened to the radio show, and those emphasize a lot more of the shock and awe aspects of it. So it was interesting to see the like more human side of the reaction in this
Yeah,
version.
I gotta say there were a lot of audiobook options for this book.
Yeah, gotta love stuff that's gone public domain.
And it's
um,
not like crazy long, so anybody who's got the weekend can record their own and
exactly.
it's
Public
good
domain,
stuff.
maybe.
Baby.
It sounds like VS Drake agrees that the book had a good handle on a lot of different types of reactions to this sort of thing. Um, so did you have another topic on hand, or
um sorry, typing. Um what did you think so I'm trying to think it's a little muddy tonight, but so the end of the book where the dude just returns home and he's all like, "Cheerio, it's a good day. My wife is alive. So's my what was it, cousin or nephew or something."
Mhm.
What what do you think of that ending? Do you think it was good, or do you think they should have had something happen or some sort of side story about how the wife survived? What do you think of her just kind of popping up in the end?
uh, that felt a little bit like, I wrote the story I wanted to tell. Let's tie up some loose ends real quick. I don't think he particularly cared, but he knew his audience would be mad if he didn't do something about it. So he's like, yeah, let's just make sure she shows up at the end here. Because it did feel super rushed and just kind of out of pocket. Like, I don't think honestly, I would have rather her not shown up and just had it left with, like, well, War of the Worlds is over. Humanity's got to rebuild. Either write a sequel or let people just imagine whatever the hell they want. You know? I would rather it just not have been in there at all. Uh, that or something akin to like, him being in London and them getting the first radio signal from France that a whole bunch of people made it over there, and the character resolves to go to France to find his wife. Like, leave it at that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I
I,
think the movie did a similar thing where um the main character showed up at his ex-wife's house, and like they were practically untouched and they were just fine riding it out in their little villa in the streets. And it's like I think it plays an important perspective for the story that like not everywhere was a hellscape of ruin and disaster. But at the same time, it feels like um I don't know. It'd be cool if something happened other than just, oh, they were there and then they realized the aliens all died, so they went home.
Well, I mean, I think it is something of a recognition that the end is a little anticlimactic when it comes to drama, but I think you can achieve that without giving the like hand wavy. Everybody found each other just fine, you know.
Yeah.
He did. Wells did enough of that, leaving you to fill in the social gaps because he had to fill in so many of the like narrative and scientific and observational gaps that to have him force that at the end, I think that is very much just a, well, people are going to hate the book if I don't have a happy ending, so let me put the happy ending in there. And I think we've gotten to a point where that isn't as necessary anymore, but you know, part of that is because of the groundwork laid by books like this one. I mean, I don't know about you, but there were so many parts in that book where I was just like, man, we've been borrowing from this stuff. We're still borrowing from tropes in this book to this day, you know?
Yeah.
And it's kind of wild to see like how much influence it's had. I even what 130 years later.
Somebody
So
brought the math. Final thoughts?
yeah, final thoughts are this book is absolutely dated, but it is worth but it I think it is worth a read for anybody who is an enjoyer of sci-fi because this is one of those seminal works that has informed like pretty much not everything to come after, but a good chunk of the genre to come after it. If nothing else, it's worth reading for that aspect. It's still a pretty well written story, a pretty good story, even for the timing, the difference in time between and technology between then and now.
Yeah.
And you know, so I'd still recommend it. It's not like my favorite story of all time, but it's a damn good classic, and it's a damn good classic for a reason. So absolutely would recommend to sci-fi lovers, especially. What
Yeah.
about you?
Yeah, I didn't find the writing style overly compelling. It was interesting and it made me question how much was it the author, like I mentioned earlier, me thinking about how much is the author portraying somebody and how much of it is the actual author's voice. Um, so I enjoyed it in that perspective. It was kind of a fun thought process there. The story was interesting. It did feel a little wandery plot wise, and obviously there was like no overwhelming conclusion to the plot, which is like, oh, and they died. But it was enjoyable. Definitely worth the 5-ish hours of audiobook time to listen to.
Uh,
Um, scratches the alien niche, you know.
VS Drake says that it's a foundational read for sci-fi horror. Absolutely agree. Enjoyed the book, but glad it was short. Yeah, I get that, and I think that points to your note that the style. I think that might be the most dated part about it is the style, and there's only so much of that kind of like academic droll that you can go through before you just kind of need it to end. So I think if it had
Yeah.
been too much longer, it would have been tough to read. Uh, yeah, I get that. And I think that points to your note that the style. I think that might be the most dated part about it is the style, and there's only so much of that kind of like academic droll that you can go through before you just kind of need it to end. So I think if it had been too much longer, it would have been tough to read. Yeah, so I get it. Yeah, I think it is a good part of the reason why I'm recommending it as well is because it's not that big of a time investment to get a fair amount out of your read. Even if it's not your favorite, there's still things to appreciate about it.
Yeah, I agree. VS Drake also said it's cool to see the great great granddad to some of my fave sci-fi horror stories. Solid beach read, IMO. Yeah, yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And
Let's wrap up with our next books here. July 26th is our next meeting. We'll be reading the Kaiju Preservation Society by John Scalzi. Excited to return to Scalzi. He's a cool author. And then after that is August 16th. We'll be doing Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, a popular novel.
yes, Sunrise on the Reaping is one of the prequels to the Hunger Games. You don't have to have read it, but any of the other ones before, as it's a prequel, but probably helps to understand the general premise of the Hunger Games.
Yeah,
Uh, please
I
join
would
us for
say
that.
I would say book or movie is probably a good idea before reading
Yeah,
that one.
you don't have to have like read the books, but if you've seen the movie, that's probably just fine. Uh, and coming up in September, we have Adventures in Reading. We'll have the vote up for that one. That's adventure books, and that is for September. And for October, we're going to be doing our usual horror thriller month. So send us your suggestions for that to tweet. I was trying to think of a funnier thing to say, and I just brain farted.
All
All
right.
right.
You read any side pieces this month? It was a long month.
So many. So I have been making my way through a fair amount of stuff. Some First Nations books. There's Indians on Vacation by Thomas King. Uh, Never Whistle at Night, which is a First Nations horror anthology. I've read a bunch more of the Star Wars books, which have I'm kind of glad I did because I'm also playing Star Wars Survivors, and the books that I've been reading had a note from the High Republic era that actually I understood the reference of. Um, and it's not anything mentioned in any of the movies, so
Nice.
I am an official Star Wars nerd.
Good, good, good.
Excellent.
Give
Yeah.
in to your nerdiness.
um, but yeah, those were my main ones for this time around. What about you? Any side pieces?
Nice. Yeah, I read the fourth, I think it was the fourth Wheel of Time book. Um Whatever, it was the next one in the series wherever I left off. Not the best Wheel of Time book, I gotta say. It was very, very slow going for about the first three quarters, and I found it really hard to stay focused on making my way through it because it was just super uninteresting. But I made it. The last quarter was good. I made it.
Yeah, that's kind of been my sticking point with those two is just like, man, do you have to go through a slog? I mean, the payoff is great, but is it balanced? It depends on the person. Was the book
VS
The Shadow
Drake.
Rising?
I'll just look. Hang on a second. While I'm looking, VS Drake had some interesting reads. He read two Ice Barbarian books. Smut, you smutty smutter. It was the no, that's not right. The Shadow Rising.
Okay, so that is book 4 then. Right on
Yeah.
that.
He read some Star Wars books, reread A Wise Man's Fear. Excellent book. Good choice. Good choice, sir. And When Wizards Follow Fools, Arcane Ascension 5. That book is also good. Yes, yes. So is book 6, by the way.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. I know this was a shorter episode, but as you can tell, we're tired, and this book, while classic, only has so much that can be sucked out of it. So, thank you for joining us and being patient with us. And it's a lazy summer, so get reading and join us next book.
Yeah, see you guys next book.
Bye.
Book.